the objective conditions for a military coup are based on three things. One, the military is the most opportunistic organization in society. They are the most organized ones, and they have the weapons of mass destruction, and therefore they're capable of doing anything. The second thing, they look at the civilian population. They look at the kind of inflation you have in different parts of Africa or in a given country. They look at the livelihoods of people. They look at the human rights record of the incumbent, and therefore they come promising, okay, we're going to remove this guy, and we're going to remove the guys with him, we're going to send them to court or kill them, and finally, Guinea will be fine. That's when the young people who are unemployed, who don't have any income, who are not even getting any benefit out of the natural resources that are being exported from their own country, they have hopes that this will change. The third thing is the military becomes more brutal. The military becomes, as a government, the worst that you've seen in history. And it takes another military to take them down. That's what happened in Guinea itself when, after Sekou Touré, this guy took office, and of course, with all kinds of abuse in the office, he was replaced by Camara, and Camara eventually became even worse than him. And therefore, what's important, as I said, is democracy is not just a moment. Democracy is a generational project where we change the minds of people to a point where they accept the basic principles of democracy, of which elections are an important part. But political culture development, the development of political institutions, and the development of political rules like the constitution, like rules of the game that are designed by the legislator, the almost arbitrary rules that come out of the Council of Ministers. All this have to be able to work in synergy to be able to generate a modicum of democracy. And I think with the African elite providing the software for this, with the media sending the message to the African public, this would be a kind of a generational project. Because what we see is the world, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we had our first elections in Africa, left and right. Governments were changed, elections were undertaken. Sorry. In fact, we carried out a 9-country case study at the time to see the transition from authoritarian governments to democracy. 111 professors were involved, and I was one of the coordinators of the study, hoping that we would see some elements of what are the tools and instruments that are now necessary to be able to identify successful transition into democracy. But after a brief period, this will all change, you know. The Cold War was not over, but now the trade war we have between the West and the East, and China's rise as an emerging power, economic power and political power, has created a kind of a second Cold War for the African continent. And therefore, each of these players in the Cold War would want presidents that they would want to keep in order to maintain their relationships. And in international relations, this is a very tricky scenario. And it's important that the African elite now would be able to undertake serious research and inform the media to inform the African public. You know, the international institutions, all of them are based on the will of the African presidents. They cannot go out of that. Be it the United Nations. The United Nations is a company of leaders that are meeting today in New York. The African Union, actually, as I said, as I told you before, even the Union's constitution says we, the heads of government, the heads of state and governments in Africa. It doesn't say we, the African people. Although the UN Constitution, the UN Charter says we, the people of the United Nations. So it's very important that we have a third channel beyond international institutions where we can deal with democratic development and democratic accountability of African states. And I tell you, this guy will not go by his own free will. For one, coup d'etat is a crime. And therefore, any decent government replacing him will be taking him on to the rule of law. And therefore, he will stay as much as possible. The second thing is, what he will do is he will have an elected government that he can control. And then eventually people will get used to the idea that he was the agent of change and they will keep him there. And therefore, these are important things that we need to look into. And of course, I haven't done a detailed analysis of what's really happening in Guinea, except the information and news that I'm getting. But definitely, in one of my books, I have detailed African coups and counter-coups to a point where this continent has become the most miserable and a basket case for G7 every time they meet. Every time G20 meets, Africa becomes the kind of backwater where everybody has to do some donation to get us out of whether it's vaccine, whether it's food, whether it's money, and whether it's whatever assistance the African people need. But the misery we see in this continent is something that we cannot ignore.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I will ask you one question before we move to the possible solution. The question is, what do you think is the real effect of coup d'etat in the national development of a country? Say, for example, like the case of many countries in Africa, of course, because you'll be analyzing this data for a long time. So what are the real consequences of coup d'etat?
Well, of course, there is a disruption in development work. I know in Guinea, President Alpha Conde has contributed a lot, but he hasn't contributed enough to the satisfaction of the Guinea people. And this coup d'etat will take back Guinea to almost to its post-colonial years, where you start again. New alliance will be formed, new companies will be looking for the mineral wealth of Guinea, new corrupt leaders will be coming in, and therefore it's very disruptive. But on the other hand, if President Alpha Conde wanted to rule like Bouteflika in Algeria until he goes on wheelchair, then that's not fair. So there must be a balance. This could be a good thing happening for Guinea, frankly, because at the end of the day, this guy used the power of his office, the power of the state, the power of his military, his law enforcement, the resource of the state to have a referendum and to be elected again. This is illegal by any standards. And therefore, this coup d'etat would prove good if they prove on their promises that they're going to promise prosperity for Guinea and that they will soon hand over to an elected government. But when you say an elected government, it should be on a condition that people really understand whom they are voting for. If people in the United States can vote for President Trump, who's been messing up literally everything, including, his generals had to instruct the military not to allow him to use the nuclear triggers in the White House in a book that just came out now. You have this kind of people running the biggest economy and the biggest military in the world. And therefore, even their own people were afraid that he could start a nuclear war anytime. But, we have the institutions and the people there. In Africa too, we need to have this kind of people who are permanent managers of the state who can have some kind of checks and balances on the executive leadership of that country. So for me, it will be good for Guinea, and they will be well advised if they schedule elections, if they schedule civic education, massive civic education, with the support of the international community for people to elect people who can really benefit the people of Guinea and benefit the development of Guinea as a country.